welcome to Lyman Wesleyan Church. So just a show of hands, is anyone else disappointed that that's in Western Canada? Yeah, because I definitely was the first time I heard of this rage room. Because man, I don't know about you, but I have certainly had days where I could use a room like that. And you know, some of us maybe more than others, but I know that we've all had days where we could certainly use our own personal rage room. As I was kind of exploring that company's website a little bit, I came across an interview from the owner, and he said a line that just absolutely cracked me up. At one point, he said that a lot of people with desk jobs are excited to smash printers. Now, if you've ever seen me work with a printer, you know that I relate to that 100%. I would be first in line to smash some printers. If you've never seen me work with the printer downstairs, that's because I'm not allowed to do it anymore. Because every time I try, either I end up breaking the printer or the printer breaks my will. I mean, it's a fight every time. So I could certainly use one of those rage rooms. And then wouldn't it be nice if we had a room like that to go to anytime we experienced, any kind of negative emotion. I'm not just talking about anger anymore. But what if we had a room to go to anytime we were feeling upset or hurt or angry or even scared, and we could just let it all out? But the reality is, that's not the reality, right? There is no such thing as a rage room in our everyday life. And yet we experience this wide range of emotions every day. And for the most part, we're completely unequipped to handle them. A few years ago, a group of psychologists from Cambridge University launched an experiment or a study. And in this study, they discovered 412 different emotions that humans experience. 412 different emotions that we can experience on any given day. I mean, that's a lot. And the reality is, for most of us, we're completely unequipped to handle these emotions in a healthy way. And for most of us, when we either overreact to our emotions and we allow them to control our actions, we allow them to control what we do, or we allow the pendulum to swing the other way. And we try to suppress our emotions and pretend like they don't affect us, like they don't have any say in our lives. We pretend like they just don't exist. And somewhere in the middle is a healthy reaction to emotions. Because you see, when we suppress our emotions, it's like we're just shaking up a can of Coke or Dr. Pepper or Sprite, whatever your drink of choice is. It's like we're just shaking it up, and eventually the lid's going to come off. And you know, if you've ever dropped a Coke and then picked it up, that when you open a can of shaken up Coke, it just spills everywhere. And that's what happens when we try to just suppress our emotions and feel like they don't exist, pretend like they don't exist. Eventually the lid comes off. And sometimes our emotions get spilled onto an innocent bystander that has nothing to do with the reason we're really upset. And other times the pendulum swings the other way, and we let our decisions control us, and we end up making decisions that we regret, either because we hurt someone that we love, or because we made a decision that impacted our future life, and it's not something that we would have wished for ourselves, but it's just where we're at because of the decision we made, either in anger or sadness or hurt. And so either reaction is not a healthy way to handle our emotions. Now, before I get any further, I want to make it clear that emotions themselves are not evil. I know a lot of times, especially in the church, we kind of have this idea that certain emotions are sin, like anger. And feeling a certain emotion, even a negative emotion like anger, is not a sin. Now, what we choose to do with that anger, with that desire, with that hurt, that can certainly lead to sin. And so we have to be careful. But for example, desire is not a sin. It's a natural human reaction. But when we linger on that desire and we allow it to turn into lust, or even if we act on that desire, that is when it becomes a sin. Anger in and of itself is not a sin. In fact, there are many examples in the Bible when God the Father and Jesus the Son both expressed anger. The most popular one is maybe when Jesus flipped the tables in the temple because he was so mad at the way that they were treating God's house. So anger is not a sin because God himself felt it. But what we do with that anger can certainly become a sin if we don't handle it in the correct way. Another example is getting your feelings hurt. Getting your feelings hurt is not a sin, but withholding forgiveness from someone because of the way that they hurt you is most certainly a sin. And so our emotions themselves are not sins, but we have to be careful because they can lead us down dangerous paths. And so we have to learn how to control our emotions rather than allowing our emotions to control us. And so last week we started this series that's called Break the Cycle. And we started talking about some of the judges, and today we're going to be in Judges chapter 14. And I'm just going to be honest with you, the judges were a mess. And so in this series we've been kind of looking at some of the judges of ancient Israel. These were men and women who rose up to lead Israel before the time of the kings. And so there was this kind of period in ancient Israel where Israel was kind of stuck in a cycle. And the cycle was that they would disobey God, which would lead to some kind of consequence. Right? When your children disobey you, you have to discipline them, otherwise they don't learn. And so the Israelites, God's children, would disobey God. And so he would allow a disaster to happen to them as a form of discipline. And then, of course, after the disaster happened, they would cry out to God, and being the loving God that he is, he would deliver them from the disaster that had struck. And then, over time, they would fall back into the same pattern. They would run away from God again. They would allow false gods to rule their life. And then the whole cycle would happen again. Disobedience, disaster, deliverance. Disobedience, disaster, deliverance. Over and over and over again. As a whole, the Israelites were led by their emotions. And it caused this cycle. It didn't allow them to grow as a nation. It didn't allow them to grow as individuals because they were stuck in this cycle. And so God chose judges. Like I said, they were flawed human beings. I mean, the one we're going to look at today was just a mess. They were by no means superheroes. And in fact, the judge that we're going to look at today in Judges 14, he had a very difficult time controlling his emotions, and it ruined his life. So if you want to follow along, we're going to read the whole chapter of Judges, so starting in verse 1. Samson went down to Timnah and saw there a young Philistine woman. When he returned, he said to his father and mother, I have seen a Philistine woman in Timnah. Now get her for me as my wife. And so notice there's already a beginning pattern of impulsiveness. He sees it, he wants it. And his father and mother replied, isn't there an acceptable woman among your relatives or among all of our people? I mean, they're essentially saying, like, we're an entire nation of acceptable women. Can't you just choose one of them? Must you go to the uncircumcised Philistines to get a wife? And I want to point out, this isn't racism or separatism that's causing the Israelites, his mother and father to feel this way, but they just have seen the way that outsiders have dragged the Israelites away from God. And his father and mother, at least, seem to have learned the lesson that we have to stick to God's word or else disaster happens. And so they're trying to get their son to just do what's right? Because isn't that the goal of parenthood? But Samson said to his father, "Get her for me. She's the right one." His parents did not know that this was from the Lord, who was seeking an occasion to confront the Philistines, for at that time they were ruling over Israel. So in the cycle we were talking about, we're in the middle of the discipline, the disaster part of this cycle. So Samson went down to Timnah together with his father and mother. As they approached the vineyards of Timnah, suddenly a young lion came roaring toward them. The Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon him, so that he casually tore the lion apart with his bare hands, as he might have torn a young goat, because who doesn't just, whip apart goats in their spare time? But he told neither his father nor his mother what he had done. Then he went down and talked with the woman, and he liked her. Sometime later, when he went back to marry her, he turned aside to look at the lion's carcass, and in it he saw a swarm of bees and some honey. He scooped out the honey with his hands and ate as he went along. When he rejoined his parents, he gave them some, and they too ate it. But he did not tell them that he had taken the honey from the lion's carcass. Remember that, because we're going to come back to it in a minute. Now his father went down to see the woman, and there Samson held a feast, as was customary for young men. When the people saw him, they chose 30 men to be his companions, probably to keep him under control. "Let me tell you a riddle," Samson said to them. "If you can give me the answer within the 7 days of the feast, I will give you 30 linen garments and 30 sets of clothes. But if you can't tell me the answer, you must give me 30 sets of linen garments and 30 sets of clothes." "Tell us your riddle," they said. "Let's hear it." He replied, "Out of the eater, something to eat. Out of the strong, something sweet." And for 3 days they could not give the answer. On the 4th day they said to Samson's wife, "Coax your husband into explaining the riddle for us, or we will burn you and your father's household to death. Did you invite us here to steal your property?" Then Samson's wife threw herself on him, sobbing, "You hate me, you don't really love me. You've given my people a riddle, but you haven't told me the answer. I haven't even explained it to my father or mother. Why would I explain it to you?" So she cried the whole 7 days of the feast, and on the 7th day he finally told her, because she continued to press him. She in turn explained the riddle to her people. So before sunset on the 7th day, the men of the town said to him, "What is sweeter than honey? What is stronger than a lion?" And Samson said to them, "If you had not plowed with my heifer, you would not have solved my riddle." Man, he's got a way with words. Then the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon him. He went down to Ashkelon, struck down 30 of their men, stripped them of everything, and gave their clothes to those who had explained the riddle. Burning with anger, he returned to his father's home, and Samson's wife was given to one of his companions, one of his friends who had attended him at the feast. Did you catch what just happened? He just murdered 30 people and stole their clothes because he couldn't keep his mouth shut. Talk about allowing your emotions to control you. A little background on Samson. Samson was a Nazarite. Nazarites were these people who were a part of the Israelite company, but they took a special vow, usually just for 30, 60, 90 days, that for the length of the vow, that they would go above and beyond what the law required of God's people. And there are only a few examples of lifelong Nazarites in the Bible. John the Baptist is one. Samson is another. He actually was set apart from the womb. An angel visited his mom and said, "You are going to give birth to a son. While you're pregnant, don't cut your hair, don't drink from the fruit of the vineyard, because your son is going to be set apart for a special purpose." So Samson had spent his whole life kind of set apart. And as a part of this special vow that Samson had taken, he was not to come in contact with a carcass, with a dead body in any shape, whether it was human or animal, even a friend or a close relative. Because of the vow that he chose to take as an adult, he chose to continue this vow. And yet, the moment he sees honey in the carcass of a lion, which just doesn't even sound appetizing, but for some reason it was, and the first thing that comes to his mind, he doesn't think about God's law. He doesn't think about, this vow that he has made. He thinks, I want that, so I'm going to take it. And it's that kind of attitude that really controlled Samson's life. I mean, his story starts in Judges chapter 13, and it goes through 16. And later on, we hear about Delilah, who is not the wife that we're talking about here, but is actually Samson's second wife. And if you know the story of Samson and Delilah, again, it's the story of him allowing impulsiveness, allowing his desires and his anger to control his life. We see first Samson is controlled by lust. After a woman that God had forbidden him to marry. Not because the Israelites were better than anyone else, but simply because they were God's chosen people whose one job was to worship him. And God knew that the marriage relationship is a special, intimate relationship, and you tend to influence one another. And so God knew that if Samson were to marry someone who didn't worship God, then eventually Samson would fall away. And so for Samson's own protection, the Philistine women were off limits. And yet Samson doesn't care. Later on, he breaks at least 3 of the 10 commandments. You could probably argue for more. But he doesn't respect his father and mother. Right? He demands that they go against their beliefs, their traditions, to get this wife for him that they don't want. And then again, he disrespects them by not telling them that they are eating forbidden honey. In verse 19, he breaks 2 more commandments by murdering 30 people. I mean, that's kind of a big one. And then he steals from their dead bodies so that he can keep a vow, pay a debt that wouldn't have even existed if he just kept his mouth shut. And so over and over again, we have this pattern of Samson being controlled by his emotions. And the end result is not pretty. You see, not once does Samson pause to think as he lives his chaotic, destructive life. I would encourage you sometime this week to find time to read Judges 13 through 16. I mean, if you want an action story, any kind of story you want, it's found in there. Samson's whole life is just controlled by his anger. Over and over again, he gives into it. And a little spoiler alert, it's actually his anger that causes him to be trapped by the Philistines. And it is his own anger that ends up killing him. He becomes trapped in his own mini version of Israel's sin cycle. He disobeys God, which causes him to suffer the consequences of his sin. A few times God delivers him, but eventually, because he keeps relying on his own strength, God allows him to face the full consequences of his actions, and the Philistines capture him. Talk about an anti-hero. Talk about someone that we don't necessarily want being our role model. And then on the flip side, just to give us a little bit of hope this morning, in Galatians 5, Paul lists off the fruit of the Spirit, right? And one of the fruits of the Spirit is self-control. Now, I think we have a little bit of a misunderstanding when it comes to the fruit of the Spirit. I think a lot of times, as we read that, where it says the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, and self-control. And we can read that list and we can think, oh man, I could never be like that. I could never be like that. Or maybe we think, oh, I'm good at this part, but this is where I need to work on. And it becomes, what can I do? What do I need to do? What do I need to produce in order to have the fruit of the Spirit in my life? And yet, when you think about fruit, if you plant an apple tree, it's going to produce fruit. It's going to produce an apple, because that is the very nature of an apple tree. And by the same token, if the Spirit of God is planted firmly in our hearts, it's going to produce the fruit of the Spirit. And so, like any other fruit of the Spirit, the seed that is planted in our hearts has to be planted by the Spirit of God. The moment you became a Christian, the Spirit of God entered your life. And you now have 24/7 access to God, to His power, to His perfection. All we have to do is give room for those for those fruits to grow in our lives. We just have to give room for it to grow in our lives. And so we tend the fruit of the Spirit like self-control. We tend it, we water it by spending time with God, by reflecting on His Word and His character. And yet not once throughout his whole story does Samson pause and think and reflect. But even someone as flawed, as broken, as messy as Samson was able to be used by God. On the day that Samson died, he used his bare hands to knock down pillars in a building that held 3,000 of his enemies. Now I know that sounds like a really gruesome way to be used by God, but we have to remember that this was a time of war, and the entire purpose of Samson's life was to free the Israelites from the rule of the Philistines, who were cruel and deadly. And so even in the messiest part of Samson's life, mistake after mistake after mistake that finally got him to a point where it seemed like there was no way out. Even in that moment, God used him. Even in our imperfection, God is still perfect. And so what in the world can we learn from a story like that? For one, we as Christians, we have to learn to control our emotions. We cannot allow emotions to be the ruler in our life. When we said yes to Jesus, we said yes to Him being Lord over every aspect of our life. And that includes our emotions. Now, Samson, he may be an extreme case, but he is a perfect example of how not to live our lives. Because each one of us, whether we realize it or not, we make a choice every day. We make the choice to either let our emotions define us, or the choice to be the master of our emotions. Over Christmas, Dylan and I spent some time back at my parents' house in Kansas. And one day as we were getting ready in the morning, there was someone in my family, I forget who, I think it was one of my sisters, happened to mention that I had taken the longest shower. Now, for the rest of the story to make sense, I need to give you a little bit of background information and open up about some of my weird insecurities. So give me grace, please. Growing up, one of the most consistent frustrations that I caused my parents, at least that I'm aware of, was how long it took me to get ready in the morning, specifically to shower. I mean, I'm talking like, for years on end, I would take like 45-minute showers every day. I know. In hindsight, I can see that this is a ridiculous amount of water and energy, and I understand now why my parents got so frustrated, and if I could pay back all the water bills, I would, but I've learned to significantly cut back. But as a teen, and even as a child, this became a really touchy subject for me. Because you see, I am in my flesh a people pleaser to the core of my being. I mean, if I know that somebody is unhappy, it ruins my day. And so I knew that these ridiculously long showers made my parents unhappy, but in my brain, for some reason, there was nothing I could do about it, and so I just kept taking long showers, knowing that my parents were really upset about it, and it became this weird insecurity for me. Like, I was really insecure about how long it took me to shower in the morning, because all of the normal things that middle schoolers are insecure of, that was the one I chose to be insecure about. And it got to the point where I got incredibly defensive, right? Because isn't that what our insecurities do? They cause us to put up walls. And so I got incredibly defensive anytime it was brought up, which was pretty much every morning. And so eventually, I grew up and I learned to shower like a normal human, and I thought in my head that I had worked through all of these insecurities that I had. And then fast forward again to this past Christmas, we're at my parents' house, and someone just casually mentions, without thinking, without knowing that I'm this weirdo with weird insecurities, just happens to mention that I must have had a nice shower. It was pretty long, it must have been nice. And immediately, there was a flood of anger. Immediately, my defenses went up. And in that moment, I had two options. I could give in to my anger, I could lash out, I could make some snide remark, and I could just let my anger control me. Or two, I could take a beat, take a breath, reflect even for 1 second, and then respond. And the reality is that lashing out at her for such an innocent comment would have been the most ridiculously response I could have given. I mean, no sane, normal person would expect someone to be that defensive about the length of their showers. And there is no way that my sister was trying to start a fight. I mean, there was no way that she was trying to pick on me because again, it's just a weird, there's no way she could have expected that. It was something that I had to deal with, something that I had to work through. It's not her fault that I have these weird insecurities. And so in that moment, I chose to pause. I chose to keep my mouth shut. I chose to remind myself of all of that. And immediately the situation diffused. In fact, I'm not even sure that she's aware that there was a situation. Because again, there was no malintent on her part. And now I'm sure that probably no one else in this room has these weird insecurities about showering, but there are definitely insecurities, there are definitely triggers, there are situations that will cause each one of us to get upset, or hurt, or sad, and they are different for each one of us. And when it comes to responding to these negative situations, the first thing that our flesh wants to do is respond. And then if we take the time to do any reflecting at all, it's usually at 1 o'clock in the morning when we can't sleep because our regret is keeping us up. If we take the time to reflect at all. But if we want to develop self-control in our lives, if we want to give space for the fruit of the Spirit to grow in our lives, we have to change our habits. Instead of responding and then reflecting, we take a 3-step approach. And I just want to say this is something that I'm not perfect at. No one is ever going to be perfect at. But as we continue to implement it into our lives, it will get easier and easier. And so this 3-step approach, number 1 is that we pause. We breathe. We take just 1 second to acknowledge the emotion that we're feeling, which is really difficult for some of us. Some of us haven't been taught to acknowledge emotion. And then number 2, we reflect, like 4 seconds tops. Take 4 seconds to reflect. Ask ourselves some questions. Number 1, why did this affect me so much? What does it tell me about myself? What's going on in my life that this outside force has this much control over me? And why am I allowing it to have that control in my life? And how would Jesus respond here? Is this person really mad at me, or are they frustrated at the situation? Because if they're frustrated at the situation, we can tackle it together. And if you need a moment, you can even say, listen, what you just did, what you just said, it upset me. Okay, we have permission in this church to be honest with each other when we're upset. So we have permission to say, what you just did upset me. Give me a moment to reflect before I respond. And then finally, 3, we respond only after pausing and reflecting. And then in that case, our response is much less likely to cause regret or to continue a cycle of pain. But, and I know we're getting close on time here, but there's one more thing that we can learn from Samson's story this morning. There's one more thing. That even in our imperfections, God is perfect. Even when we respond first and reflect later, even when we respond and allow our emotions to control us, God is still perfect. Even though it took Samson his whole life to learn to listen to God, when he finally did, God showed up in an amazing way. Even when Samson was trapped in a situation that was caused by his own actions, even when there was no way out, God provided a way out. God showed up. There is nowhere that we can run. There is no situation that we can cause because of our own brashness, our own impulsiveness, that is outside the love of God. There's nothing we can break that God can't fix. This applies across the board to parenting, to relationships, to marriage, to coworkers, to just our own dumb decisions. There's nothing we can break that God can't fix. We might face consequences of our actions, but God is still there, and God is still good. In Matthew 28:20, Jesus assures us that he is with us until the very end of time itself, until the very end of the age. Because we serve a God of second chances. We serve a God of fifth chances. We serve a God of 100th chances. When we turn back to him, he is always already running toward us. And so this morning as we close, and maybe you know that there's a situation in your life where you've allowed impulsiveness to get the best of you, it's not too late to come back. There's nowhere outside the love of God. In our imperfection, God is still perfect. So if you would bow your hands with me. Heavenly Father, I know that it can be difficult to hear to hear about times in our life when maybe we don't feel like we have control, but in the end we really do. And Lord, I would just pray that as we leave here this morning, I know that there may have been things that I've said that have maybe come across as condemning or hopeless or fix it yourself. But God, I pray that you would teach us throughout this week that it's not something we do in our own strength, but it's something we do as we learn to rely on you, on your goodness, on your strength, God. So Lord, I pray that you would help us to learn how to control our emotions. I pray that you would grow the fruit of self-control in our lives. Lord, no matter how young or old we are, God, it's never too late to learn. So Lord, I just pray that you would allow this fruit to grow in our lives, and that you would teach us to give space for you to grow, for your character to flourish in our lives. Lord, we thank you that no matter how many times we mess up, you are still God and you are still good. So Lord, maybe there's some repenting that we need to do. And Lord, if that's true, then we repent and we accept your forgiveness with open arms. We embrace it. Lord, it's in your holy and precious name that we pray.